December 1944. The bitter cold of the Ardennes forests in Belgium clung to everything, including the nerves of the Allied soldiers. Over 250,000 Nazi troops had stealthily infiltrated this seemingly quiet sector, a fact that should have set alarm bells ringing. Yet, for a brief moment, 3 men in an American Jeep might have slipped through the cracks. But the pervasive paranoia, a direct result of Hitler's desperate gamble, had taken root deep within the Allied ranks on the Western Front. Their broken English was the first red flag. A routine check of their vehicle unearthed a chilling cargo, concealed weapons, explosives, and the unmistakable emblem of the swastika. These were not American GIs. They were wolves in sheep's clothing, undercover Nazis, integral to one of Hitler's final, audacious strikes against the Allied lifeline, Operation Greif. The Normandy landings of June 1944 had been a monumental achievement, granting the Allies a crucial foothold in northern France, Belgium, and the surrounding territories. However, the war in Europe was far from over. The relentless push inland placed an increasing strain on Allied supply lines, stretching back across the English Channel from the Normandy beaches. Recognizing this logistical vulnerability, Adolf Hitler began to conceive of one last, grand counteroffensive, a desperate gamble to seize the initiative and potentially alter the course of the war in the West. His plans center on the Ardennes counteroffensive, a bold move to amass a significant force of Nazi troops within the rugged, mountainous terrain of southeastern Belgium. Hitler's objective was to exploit the thinly stretched Allied defenses in this sector and launch a powerful counterattack. The ultimate prize in his sights was a vital port city of Antwerp, the linchpin of the Allied supply chain. To reach Antwerp, however, a critical obstacle lay in his path: the Meuse River bridges. Their capture and destruction were paramount to disrupting Allied reinforcements and paving the way for his advance. For this high-stakes, clandestine mission, Hitler knew exactly the man he needed. October 1944. Within the imposing walls of his headquarters in Rassenburg, Eastern Prussia, Adolf Hitler summoned SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny was an imposing figure, standing well over 6 feet tall, his face bearing the grim testament of past conflicts in the form of prominent, disfiguring scars. Just a week prior, he had masterfully executed Operation Panzerfaust, a daring operation that involved the abduction of Admiral Miklos Horthy's son, effectively strong-arming the region of Hungary into resigning his position. Hitler, pleased with Skorzeny's audacious success, wasted no time in outlining his ambitious new plan for the Ardennes offensive and the pivotal role of the lieutenant colonel, a rank often translated as such in this context, was to play. Skorzeny's task was to form a highly specialized command group, designated Panzer Brigade 150. Their primary objective was to infiltrate Allied lines and swiftly capture and destroy as many of the crucial Meuse River bridges as possible before they could be secured by Allied reinforcements. To achieve this audacious goal with speed and minimal casualties, the unit would operate under the ultimate disguise, traveling in captured Allied tanks and wearing authentic U.S. Army uniforms, convincingly impersonating American soldiers. These disguised Nazis would then sow chaos and confusion among the Allied forces by issuing fabricated orders, reversing vital road signs, removing critical minefield warnings, and strategically blocking key roads, effectively turning the Allied rear areas into a tangled web of uncertainty. While sending soldiers disguised in enemy uniforms behind the lines was explicitly forbidden under the Geneva Convention, both Adolf Hitler and Otto Skorzeny were prepared to disregard international law entirely, viewing any means as justifiable in their desperate bid for victory. The audacious plan was codenamed Operation Greif, meaning Griffin, a fitting moniker for a predatory strike. To ensure its success, the Führer granted Obersturmbannführer Skorzeny virtually unlimited power and access to resources, underscoring the critical importance he placed on this deceptive operation. Hitler's ambitious timeline for the Ardennes offensive meant that Lieutenant Colonel Skorzeny had a mere 6 weeks, a month and a half, to recruit, equip, and rigorously train a brand new, highly specialized unit capable of pulling off this unprecedented deception. On October 25th, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the High Command of Nazi Germany, issued a direct order across all branches of the German military, specifically requesting volunteers possessing knowledge of the English language. The response to this unusual appeal was significant, with soldiers from various units stepping forward. Intriguingly, Allied intelligence even caught wind of the specific order approximately a month later. However, they dismissed it as a mere diversionary tactic, a ruse intended to mislead them, tragically underestimating the true nature of Hitler's intentions. Upon their arrival at what the eager volunteers believed to be a straightforward, translation-based assignment, the men were subjected to intense questioning in English by seasoned Nazi officers. Those selected for the top-secret Panzer Brigade 150 were then administered a solemn pledge of absolute secrecy, the violation of which was punishable by immediate death, underscoring the extreme sensitivity of their mission. The chosen recruits were subsequently housed at the heavily guarded Camp Greif, a secluded training facility. For the next 6 weeks, these isolated participants underwent an intensive immersion into the nuances of American culture and mannerisms. They were drilled in how to speak with American slang, how to stand casually, the specific way American GIs chew gum, and even how to march in the looser American style, a stark contrast to the rigid German goose step. According to one of the recruits, Fritz Kreis, who was just 21 years old at the time, we had to watch American films which showed us how the GIs saluted and even how they smoked cigarettes, never write down a butt, and put them one out. We were even given daily lessons in American slang. The inherent violation of the Geneva Convention in sending disguised soldiers behind enemy lines created significant challenges for Operation Greif from the outset. Many American prisoners of war, adhering to the code of conduct, steadfastly refused to hand over their uniforms to the enemy. Simultaneously, many Nazi officials harbored reservations about collecting and distributing these enemy garments, perhaps wary of the ethical implications or the potential for unforeseen consequences. As a result, much of the supplied clothing was far from ideal, torn, stained with blood from previous wearers, or clearly marked with the telltale signs of having belonged to prisoners of war. Adding to the difficulties, some of the uniforms weren't even American, further complicating the disguise. The assembled transportation for Panzer Brigade 150 also fell significantly short of the initial ambitious plans. Instead of the requested 20 Sherman tanks, 30 American armor cars, and 350 trucks and jeeps, Skorzny's team managed to gather a mere 2 broken-down Sherman tanks for armor vehicles of American origin and approximately 30 jeeps. The remainder of the operation's equipment, including the crucial armament, was German, a significant compromise that increased the risk of detection. Faced with a team hampered by inadequate English language skills and a severe shortage of authentic American vehicles, weapons, and uniforms, Otto Skorzny, ever the pragmatist, shrewdly leveraged the existing rumors surrounding the impending operation. He actively encouraged his subordinates to continue disseminating exaggerated and often wildly inaccurate stories about the attack's true intentions, hoping to amplify the sense of uncertainty and fear within the Allied ranks. Skorzny astutely believed that this campaign of disinformation, even before the first shot was fired, would sow significant distress and panic among the American and British forces, potentially weakening their resolve and creating opportunities for his disguise units. On the fateful morning of December 16, 1944, Panzer Brigade 150, along with the full force of the Ardennes offensive, commenced their counteroffensive advance. Because the earlier rumors surrounding a potential German attack in this quiet sector had been largely dismissed by Allied intelligence, the sheer scale and audacity of the German thrust caught the Allies completely off guard, achieving the element of surprise that Hitler had so desperately sought. The German forces, including Skorzny's disguise units, drove deep into the Allied lines in the initial stages, precisely as Hitler had envisioned. Suddenly, 2 relatively inexperienced and ill-prepared American divisions found themselves directly in the path of the full-scale Ardennes offensive. This unexpected and overwhelming assault triggered a series of chaotic incidents within the Allied forces, leading the already apprehensive Americans to believe they were seeing enemy spies and saboteurs lurking around every corner, their paranoia reaching fever pitch. On the second day of the intense battle, American military police, manning a checkpoint near a strategically important bridge, intercepted a jeep carrying 3 fellow soldiers. However, when questioned, the men inside the vehicle failed to provide the correct credentials and the designated passcode required to cross the bridge. Their inability to answer these seemingly routine security checks immediately raised suspicion, leading to their detention. The skeptical officers then conducted a thorough search of the jeep, uncovering the damning evidence: concealed weapons, explosives, and the unmistakable swastika emblems. During the subsequent interrogation, the men finally confessed their true identities. They were Sergeant Gunnar Billing, Corporal Manfred Pernis, and Private Wilhelm Schmidt, all loyal soldiers of the Nazi regime. Following Skorzny's prearranged instructions, Gefreiter Schmidt deliberately lied to the American officials, corroborating the widely circulated rumor that their clandestine team had been specifically dispatched to penetrate deep into France with the audacious mission of capturing General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, along with other high-ranking Allied officers. The impact of this fabricated intelligence was immediate and profound. General Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, was swiftly taken into custody and placed in isolation under heavy guard for the remainder of the year, spending an undoubtedly uncomfortable and frustrating Christmas in confinement due to the perceived threat. Utterly dumbfounded by their catastrophic oversight regarding the true nature and scale of the Germans' Operation Greif, American intelligence officials vowed to take no further risks, their previous complacency shattered. The now thoroughly rattled American forces plunged into a state of near total paranoia. Strict new orders were issued, and their soldiers were instructed to establish extensive roadblocks across the entire Ardennes front, subjecting every driver and passenger to rigorous identity checks and intense questioning. To weed out potential German infiltrators, the Americans devised a series of seemingly innocuous but surprisingly effective security questions about the minutiae of American life and culture, knowledge that even the most meticulously trained Nazi operatives would likely not possess. Popular subject for these impromptu quizzes included the capitals of various U.S. states, the names of famous movie stars, details about American baseball, and current political figures and events. However, these complex cultural litmus tests inadvertently placed British soldiers, unfamiliar with many of these specific American references, at a dangerous disadvantage, leading to numerous instances of friendly fire incidents and unwarranted detentions. Tragically, not even Canadian Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, a highly respected Allied commander, was safe from the pervasive paranoia that Skorzny's operation had so effectively induced. Upon receiving alarming news about General Eisenhower's confinement, Montgomery, concerned about his own security and eager to bolster morale, and perhaps his own ego, of the bewildered Allied troops, arranged a small, heavily armed protection team and set out towards Malmedy, a post with a larger concentration of soldiers. Meanwhile, an inaccurate rumor had spread like wildfire throughout the Ardennes, claiming that one of Skorzny's disguised commandos had successfully infiltrated Montgomery's own staff. When American guards manning a hastily erected checkpoint stopped the field marshal's car for routine questioning, a flustered and indignant Montgomery, unaccustomed to such scrutiny, flatly refused to answer their seemingly impertinent questions and impatiently ordered his driver to proceed. The increasingly suspicious guards then took drastic action, firing shots that blew out Montgomery's tires, bringing his vehicle to a screeching halt. The Canadian Field Marshal was then unceremoniously dragged from his car and taken to a nearby barn, where he was detained and subjected to hours of intense and undoubtedly humiliating questioning before his identity could be definitively confirmed. The Allied High Command was thrown into a state of considerable panic and disarray as they frantically attempted to formulate a coherent defensive plan to counter the unexpected German offensive. However, despite the initial shock and the widespread paranoia sown by Operation Greif, the American offensive line, while severely stretched and bulging inwards under the German pressure, was never truly broken. This resilient defense, forming a distinctive bulge on the map of the Western Front, ultimately gave the fierce and protracted conflict its now famous name, the Battle of the Bulge. Despite the pervasive suspicion and the initial successes of the German advance, the American troops, displaying remarkable courage and tenacity, put up a fierce and determined resistance, preventing the Nazi forces from achieving their primary objectives: the destruction of crucial Meuse River bridges and the disruption of vital Allied communication lines. After less than a week of being held in protective custody, an understandably enraged General Dwight D. Eisenhower, his patience finally exhausted, emerged from his enforced seclusion and immediately issued wanted posters for Otto Skorzny, branding him a dangerous enemy operative. These posters were widely circulated throughout Europe and eventually played a role in Skorzeny's capture at the end of the war the following year. Meanwhile, all the captured Nazi soldiers who had been found wearing American uniforms, and thus in clear violation of the Geneva Conventions, were swiftly tried by military tribunals and subsequently sent before a firing squad to face the consequences of their actions. By the end of December 1944, the hastily formed and ultimately unsuccessful Panzer, Brigade 150, was withdrawn from the Ardennes offensive, its mission a failure. And by early 1945, the American and Allied forces had successfully crushed the last major German offensive of the war, marking a decisive turning point in the final months of the conflict. Even though Otto Skorzeny held the relatively junior rank of SS Lieutenant Colonel at the time of Operation Greif, his audacious role in the Ardennes offensive sent shockwaves through the entire Allied command structure, exposing a significant vulnerability in their security and creating widespread fear and uncertainty. Through a calculated combination of daring sabotage attempts and the effective spreading of misleading rumors, coupled with the sheer momentum of the initial German offensive, he succeeded in creating significant confusion and a palpable sense of fear deep within the American lines. Even with the ultimate strategic failure of the Battle of the Bulge, Skorzeny's name became indelibly imprinted in the minds of the Allied leaders until the very end of the war, particularly on General Eisenhower and Field Marshal Montgomery, who both remained under heightened security for several weeks following the operation, a testament to the effectiveness of Skorzeny's deceptive tactics. Otto Skorzeny undeniably proved how the strategic use of subterfuge and deception could be employed as potent and effective tools in modern warfare. During the Nuremberg trials, where he faced accusations of war crimes, the lieutenant colonel displayed no remorse whatsoever for his blatant violation of the Geneva Conventions, firmly believing that his actions were justified in the context of war. By astutely exploiting the perceived weaknesses and vulnerabilities of his enemies, Otto Skorzeny firmly established his reputation as a masterful, albeit controversial, strategist, ultimately earning himself the chilling and enduring title, the most dangerous man in Europe.